Oh,
Yeah, I'm okay now.
lovely.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Morning to you, morning to the co-host, morning to Trinidad and Tobago.
What say you to our question this morning?
I would have to say I do not agree with the pilots, simply because I do not think that they used all the options that were available to them. And I think for most people who would say yes, they obviously don't have to travel or have to go anywhere today or tomorrow.
Hmm. Can you give us an update at all on what has been happening? I know the industrial court uh, granted an injunction uh, to CAL in terms of the injunctive relief to CAL in terms of the pilots in parentheses sick out. I mean, TALPA said they won't engage in industrial action, but come on, we know what happened there.
Yeah, well, we know it's they are essential service and therefore they are not supposed to be involved in industrial action. But I think if you look at the issue and the trend, one can ascertain or one can extrapolate that it is industrial action, and I think the court was right to give injunctive relief. Um, we at the Ministry of Labor are engaged with both the union and the company to understand the issues because within the IRA, the Industrial Relations Act, the minister has the right in the public interest to engage parties involved in disputes and to bring them to the table and seek resolution. Um, as of last night and yesterday, we would have contacted the union and we are looking at the facts of the matter and trying to get the parties to resolve the issues short of the kind of actions we're seeing now. My own view is that the union could have used the reconciliation process that we have in the ministry to bring the company, CAL, to the table for discussions and resolution before um, taking the action they did. But I think it depends on where you stand and what side of the fence you stand on. You may feel that that is not worth it and that you need to send a stronger message.
How much of this is as a result of this scenario in Trinidad and Tobago, where negotiations, for one reason or another, are not completed in many people's estimations in a timely manner, and we are negotiating for, I think in this case, 2014 to 2018, and that adds a layer of frustration to those who are thinking that their packages need to be upgraded.
Well, I could understand that, but you would know that negotiations can sometimes be quite complex and technical. And to say that the one party or the other is to blame for that wouldn't be fair, given that both parties have their positions and hold their positions. So if a negotiation is taking 4 or 5 years to complete, what it says to me is that both parties may be unwilling to move, or both parties have issues that they hold strongly to, and sometimes the workers may be frustrated by that, but both parties at the end are looking for what is best for them.
Let me tell you what's frustrating to workers sometimes, and this is something I've heard. You will hear, and this is not exclusive to CAL. Well, we are in dire economic times now, but the period we're negotiating for, we had good economic times, or better economic times. Let me say better economic times. So that this pervasive issue of retroactive negotiations, and I understand how you explain it because they're technical. Is it an issue of a law needing to be amended or a framework needed to be evolved to facilitate smoother, more timely negotiation completions?
One of the things that I have also heard and I have seen firsthand, Paul, is that very often unions do not send in their proposals on time. And in fact, sometimes they take as much as 2 years after the negotiations were supposed to have started to send in their their proposed terms and conditions. So on both sides of the fence, you have the issue of one, people not sending in their documentation on time, and two, on the company side, sometimes they stall for various reasons best known to them to get these things started. And when they do start, it's always one party is not quite ready and they have to postpone, and the other party is not ready. And so it gets into all kinds of issues that again, depending on what side of the fence you sit, you're going to find it quite frustrating. Now, I don't think that you need to have a special law to move these things. The law is quite clear. Practice also dictates that you don't wait for a negotiating period to end. Many times people have sent in their proposal 6 months before close, a year before. But what we generally see is people almost waiting for the end of a period before they start negotiating for the other.
Mrs. Pasabi is on record as stating that her government had been much more successful in completing a lot more negotiations in a timely manner. And this government does not have that track record. How do you respond to that?
I do not have that data. If she says that they have been a lot more successful, well, then I really, from where I sit this morning, I cannot say that she has been. And I wouldn't get into about...
But if you don't have the data, how can you say she hasn't been, as the Minister of Labour?
What's that?
As the Minister of Labour, I would presume that you would have that kind of data. And if you don't have the data, how can you debunk her proposal?
I am not debunking her proposal. I am saying I do not know. I am not tracking how many negotiations UNC or Passad government would have been successful or negotiated. I am dealing with what is before me now. To do so is of no value to me.
Do you think how would you describe the industrial relations climate in the country presently? I mean, this kind of thing is one thing. The unions had been agitating for a while in various sectors, private and public sector representations.
I think that the current labor climate is not the best. I think we have a lot of issues being dealt with at the same time. And, one can only go on the backdrop of the 4% that government has offered to the public service and the protective services and stuff. And we all know the pushback and what that has created. We have the CAL issue now. We had the issue of which company in the energy sector recently with OWTU that they escaped me now. So you have had a number of companies who have been in the forefront fighting for negotiations.
You always have negotiation periods coming. You always have negotiation periods coming up in any administration's timeline. And I know for the 4%, some unions have accepted the 4%, but of course, the elephant in the room, the PSA, I believe, has not.
No.
And the PSA, which is as I call it, the elephant in the room, because they represent the most of the public sector, and they also have not signed on the issue of the retirement age going to 65, and which many unions are opposed to. And when we have spoken to union leaders, part of the objection is that the loss of benefits in terms of people who can retire at 60. And I'm tackling this question to you, Minister. Why doesn't the government, if it is an NIB concern, which came out of the actuarial assessment that the retirement age should go to 65, which a lot of countries have done, why as a state don't we say, okay, we're taking the age to 65, but all people, there's a transition period of 5 years, all people who are retiring in the next 5 years can elect to retire at age 60 with no loss, but they can also elect to go straight to 65 or any period in between without any loss in terms of their remuneration. So it eases the transition and the animosity that people have towards it.
That is quite a logical and sensible approach. On the issue of age 65, what I would say is that there is a discussion. There is not a formal document on the table that seeks to arrive at how it will be operationalized. I agree with you wholeheartedly that one cannot come and get up next day and say it is now 65 without looking at its impact on people. Many people would have made retirement decisions 10 years ago, and therefore it would be unfair to unilaterally say to them that you're now going to go home at 65. So I think there would be some level of dialogue, and there would be some level of what we are doing now, discussion in the public and private sectors to determine if we go that way, when we go that way, and how do we go that way. But I agree with you wholeheartedly that one has to offer different streams in the implementation of such a proposal.
There are several issues that came up during the pandemic and before. One of the major issues in this country that the private sector raises, and I guess the public sector has been affected by it too, and that I guess I know, is the issue of productivity. As the Minister of Labour, do you think we've done enough to deal with this productivity issue in the context of the country's competitiveness? Because if we are to be a competitive country in terms of the manufacturing of the goods and services, particularly in the manufacturing sector, even in the energy sector, we have to become more productive. We have to increase those indices.
That is an issue that is very active in the Ministry of Labour. In fact, there is a note before Cabinet right now with regard to the appointment of a National Productivity Board. I'm hoping that by the end of August, first week in September, we'll be able to bring that board together.
What will be the mandate of that board?
What's that?
What will be the mandate of that board?
The mandate of that board would be to look at the data within the country, to create programs, and to look at how we put forward to the national community programs indicating why we need to be productive, how we need to be productive, how it impacts our trade and industry, to create policy papers and decisions and so on for government to follow, to engage unions, workers, and and so on with regards to productivity issues, to run campaigns about productivity, both in media, social, print, otherwise, and to provide some basic labor market information that creates the standards so that we could compare our productivity. Generally, that is what they'll do.
Data and information is one thing, public awareness is great. But a lot of the public sector productivity issues has to do with the present structure of the public sector and the way we do things, which is more akin to 30, 40 years ago. And there's been a lot of conversation from the Minister of Public Admin and other ministries about restructuring the public sector to facilitate more productivity. With the issue of digitization and all of that is part of that conversation. And we haven't heard a lot about that. We heard about digitization during the pandemic, and we seem to have gone all the way back to go back to the office and work. And those components that can add, if effected properly, to aid public sector workers in particular, and also impact the private sector in a more productive environment. Structure is important. The way we do things cannot be the way we did things 40 years ago. And that is a big part of it, in addition to what you described as public awareness, data gathering, etc.
All right, I have three things to say on that. One, on the public administration side, the restructuring of the public service is quite an extensive exercise, in that once you restructure, jobs change, and therefore you have to do job analysis and new job descriptions and so on, and that will take some time. I am told that they're coming close to the end of that, and therefore within the end of this fiscal, maybe early fiscal, I don't want to speak for the Minister of Public Admin, but they should be finished with some of the crucial work they're doing. Secondly, on digitization also is reflective of the processes and so on that come out of those job descriptions, the technology, the hardware, the software, and so on. And those are not overnight fixes. But on the issue of productivity, the third thing I would say is that management need to manage. And very often what people speak to about productivity is the fact that that managers are not managing, because people cannot come to work and sit whole day, do nothing, managers sit and watch them, and then say they're not productive.
Managers also need to be managed by PSs and divisional heads.
Yeah, well, that's so what I'm saying. Everybody have to manage.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to. It's not a one that you put structures in place, you put systems in place, and then you don't manage it. And part of my beef in general, in terms of how we work in Trinidad, is managers do not take the accountability for managing and creating an output at a level that is in relation to what you're paying people.
So are HR systems in place and operating effectively then? Because that's part of effective management, and there are programs and software to do that, to ensure that managers are performing tasks diligently and also managing their wards. And if the wards are not, you offer training, you offer incentives, and then you act in different ways if you can't get people to deliver as they are being paid to.
Right. So on the issue, so I'm just saying that, and I agree with you, and I'm saying that on the issue of productivity, it is not just about systems and structures. I think the people component is also critical, and that's my basic point.
There's culture change then. The big two words in the country these days are minimum wage. How soon will we get some information? The budget is coming up. I don't know if you want to give us a hint not jumping in front of the Minister of Finance, but Professor, before I put you in trouble, how soon will we get word? And is it the general position of the government that minimum wage will increase?
I will answer it this way. We have a minimum wages board that do tremendous work in terms of looking at inflation and how looking at a number of data points, both in the public sector and sectorially. So they do work on minimum wages for agriculture workers, for people involved in the entertainment industry, and they do quite a bit of work. They have delivered to me a report recently that suggests a particular movement in the minimum wage. I have taken that document and I would have made a recommendation to Cabinet with regards to where the minimum wage should be. Now, Cabinet is currently looking at that report and we are actively discussing it because it impacts so many things that we have to make what we consider the right decision. I do not want to say that it is next week or week after or a month from now or within the budget, because Cabinet has the ultimate authority to decide whether the recommendation is accepted or whether it is it stays status quo. So,
what would be inaccurate in quoting when doing a story and saying minister recommends increase in minimum wage?
I would say that is quite true. That would not be inaccurate, but as long as people recognize it's a recommendation and it's not a fait accompli, then that would be very true.
So our banner story this morning could be Minister of Labour recommends minimum wage increase.
And I'm saying that is from what I've said to you, that is true. I would have looked at it and I would have made a recommendation, but I also want to say that in that headline you could say awaiting Cabinet approval.
You're right on the story now?
Exactly. No, just in terms of truth.
I understand the need for accuracy. You don't want to put yourself in a position of, we don't want to put you in a position of quoting something you did not say. Is it in the range of what has been recommended? I know some people are recommending double, which I know that will cause some serious issues in the private sector and the public sector. It will increase public sector wages. It will increase private sector wages. There are implications for potential job losses, staggering of hours. What range would you suggest is the recommendation?
Well, I have no range to recommend at the moment, except what I would have think. But what I would say to the whole issue of this minimum wage thing is that the unions at their Labor Day celebrations would have asked for a 70% increase that takes it to $30 minimum. When we do our calculations, we see that each employee will now earn an additional $2,000 a month with that particular recommended increase. Now, we know that, and I think anybody looking at it would know that that $30 is not a go. I could say that off without fear of contradiction. Any economist, any business person you speak to will tell you $30 will wreak havoc and create a lot of mayhem, both in the economy and in jobs in terms of losses and so on. I think they have been calling for the union has also been calling for a living wage, which is now a new go-to internationally and so on, rather than a minimum wage. We are still at the minimum wage level and not at the living wage level, because the living wage level assumes that your full basket of goods is totally taken care of under the wage that you get. I think we are not as developed yet, neither is our economy as robust as to go towards a living wage. I would think that we need to balance the wages. If we look at trends in wages over the couple of years, we started, especially the PNM government, in a sense, since 2003, we have increased the minimum wage by 14%, in 2005 by 12.5, in 2010 we did 39%, and on December 19 we did 17% in terms of increases. So I will just give you a hint and take down those numbers and see what the average kind of looks like.
But $30, Minister, $30 an hour works out to $240 in an 8-hour day.
Yes.
And $240 per day is not unimaginable, and is at the lower end of earnings for workers in Trinidad and Tobago in 2023. $240 a day for a 5-day work week works out to $1,200 a week, which works out to $4,800 a month.
Yeah.
And you're saying that's untenable and that's ridiculous?
I am saying that by itself may sound beautiful, but when
I don't find it sounds beautiful at all. $4,800 to survive in Trinidad and Tobago in 2023 a month.
Okay, but let me put it this way: a small or medium-sized business with 10 people, right? That represents a $20,000 increase on their wage bill for the month. Who do you think is going to pay that $20,000 additional? One, the consumer, so you heat up the economy and inflation starts to skyrocket. Two, he might say at $20,000 additionally, maybe I need to cut back 5 employees. So I send home 5 employees. When I send home 5 employees, I have to work the additional 5 the 5 that I have to work them overtime and harder. You have a number of things. So you have inflationary pressure, you have job losses, you have reduced purchasing power of households, because as those prices go on, people, you think things expensive now, wait till then. You have wage compression, you have so many things. You have competitiveness that a lot of people use in the manufacturing sector that is going to go away. And therefore, you're going to see reductions in exports. You're going to see a number of things happening. So, on a personal note, I hear you, Richard, with the $4,800 does not seem to be a high figure within the context of what cost of living generally seems to be in Trinidad and Tobago. But doing so would create a lot more difficulty than you would imagine the benefits it will bring.
Overall. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up here. We're hoping to have you back on to talk, at least in a couple of weeks, on the issue of if your ministry is looking at AI and its impact on jobs in the country down the road, because other countries are looking at those things. And also, we didn't have time to talk about Point 14 and the local government election, but how you feel about that generally?
Well, I am in the Labre seat. I'm happy for my colleagues in Point 14. They did well. We are neighbors. But in Labre, we are the same place we have been for the last 30 years, where we have in a 9-member council, the PNM has 3 seats and the UNC has 6. And from time to time, we may pick up a 4th, but in general, that has been the trend, so there are no surprises there. I think we ran a good ground game. in that our candidates really did work their constituencies and try to sell the whole reform of government, the reform of local government, and we stuck to that as our clarion call, and we avoided all the other issues that are synonymous with a general election. So it's status quo in Labre as we speak.
We see how it evolves. Minister, thanks for being with us this morning. Looking forward to chatting with you not too long again.
Okay.
Until the other issues coming in. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All the best.